And the recording is now started. So good evening, everybody. My name is Doug Fink. I'm a Microsoft MVP, and I'm one of the organizers of the PowerShell user group here in New York City. And this is our second time that we're going to be doing an online virtual event, and we have some more lined up. And tonight's talk is going to be about flexible formatting in PowerShell with none other than James Brundage giving the presentation. And before we get started, if you want to ask questions, feel free to raise your hand. I'll keep an eye on the participants, and if you raise your hand, I'll unmute you and you can ask a question. I'll also keep an eye on the chat room, and if you want to pop a question in there, go ahead. We'll interrupt James as he goes, or we can save some of the questions to the end, whichever one makes sense. So as we get started here, I just want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Sapient Technologies. These folks have been kind enough to sponsor our user group for a number of years, and when we moved online, they were generous enough to sponsor us in this space as well. There's a number of products that they have that you want to consider, all from PowerShell to XML to SQL, WMI explorers, really excellent tools that make you more productive. You can go up to www.sapient.com and you can get access to these, and they have 45-day fully functional trials, so you can kick the tires and figure out what you want to do. If you think the product works, then by all means, of course, purchase it. And just as a notice, let me admit somebody else. We have Don Jones next month in June. He's going to be on talking about Shell of an Idea, exploring the origins of PowerShell. So make sure you get on there and RSVP. And we have Max Trinidad lined up for July, and he's going to be talking about working with Docker containers in Windows 10 and showing a whole bunch of stuff in that space, including some PowerShell pieces. So moving on, next up, we're going to have James Brundage. And let me find him in the participants. And we're going to have James Brundage. He's a former member of the PowerShell team. That's where I met him. And he was the founder of one of the first PowerShell consultancies, Start Automating. And he's been working with PowerShell and making modules for 14 years. And I'm just going to ask you, James, 14 years? That means 2006 we had PSM1s?
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, I mean, 2007 actually for PSM1s internally, and we'll get back to it later, but the stuff you're about to see at least partially is that old, some of it. So okay, you've stopped sharing.
Well,
let me go ahead and
why
start
don't you share it?
the screen,
and
that's kind of
take it away when you're ready.
Get going. All right, can everybody see the screen?
I can see it.
Yes.
Sweet. All right, well then, to just get on started, today's talk is about flexible formatting in PowerShell, and it is an interesting deep dive. Before we actually get that deep into it though, it's good to understand some of my background. Now, Doug was nice enough to cover it, at least parts of it. I was PowerShell team member from 2006 to 2010. Well, what did I do on the team? I tested and tried almost every aspect of PowerShell 2 and 3. I own too many features to remember, and the rest of them I played with. I also helped coordinate the development of modules throughout Microsoft. So I helped get other teams on the PowerShell bandwagon. This made me kind of become expert in various nooks and crannies of PowerShell that were useful and conducive to creating a good user experience. Then I got this crazy idea in my head that, other people outside of Microsoft might need some PowerShell help too, and thus I began consulting in PowerShell. There's a few different things. We develop scripts and modules for people. We train people about PowerShell, and we do remote co-development, which we call Solve It Together. I've been doing the scripting thing for quite a while. At the point that I think I've been doing this longer than any other career in my life at this point. And PowerShell is a very, very unique and powerful language. That's what keeps me coming back. There's a million different things about PowerShell to fall in love with, and this is kind of the story of just one of them. One of the old, weird, arcane parts of PowerShell that you use every day, but you never stop to think of. Now, again, it's a PowerShell language or powerful language. It's a unique language. It's unique in that it has things that no other language really does. One example, the one we all know, is nothing else has an object pipeline. Hopefully we got that in. But another one, again, is used every day and you rarely think about it. And that's formatting. Now, before we get into PowerShell's formatting itself, let's talk about how formatting works in other languages. In PowerShell, it's nice and built in. Very, 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 very few languages do this. In fact, the only one that I can think of off the top of my head that does an even half-decent job of it is Google Go. Most languages simply allow you to expand a string. That is, quite frankly, not enough. You need to be able to actually, do more than that. So they'll require an additional framework to render your content. So instead of actually having something nice and simple, you'll actually have some dependency on some other, say, MVC type framework to actually try to render anything effectively. The ones of them that are nice enough to expand the strings are great, but that doesn't really help you extract. You can use a whole framework that is very much their concept of a UI, but that's not really kind of simplistic enough. It's not doing it right. And again, fewer languages do it well. Additional frameworks will add bloat and then will require you to build a bridge. Formatting data is often very strongly coupled to the object and its type. So if I build your traditional, C# MVC app or, your basic Node.js app, the type of data that I'm formatting, it is, well, coupled to the object and class structure that created it. This is not good. Sometimes it'll actually make them objects much bigger, but other times it'll just require you to build too much bridge. So depending on the implementation per language, formatting can either be attached objects, which fattens the pipe required to keep them, meaning you store more data in SQL, send more over the wire, etc., or way too much of a hassle to talk to. Think, actually, if you're not muted, Doug, do you vaguely remember how fun data binding was in WPF?
Data binding was one of my favorite pieces of WPF.
In terms of pure torture?
In pure, absolute torture.
Yes. So each individual bridge you need to build gets very, very expensive and is very, very arcane. That's less than ideal. And it's kind of, to use a bit of a broken metaphor, it's a Frankenstein monster added to a given language. PowerShell, at least, made the Frankenstein monster from the first place. So it does it mostly right. How do I mean by that? Well, formatting can be applied to any object, including hierarchically. I can say that a formatter applies to this class or this subclass. The format data is not on each instance. The logic for formatters lives elsewhere, which means we're not fattening the pipe. It also means that logic can be abstracted and built upon. And this is very important. Formatting is applied when objects output. So take data binding, for example. There'd be a lot of UI tax going on just to keep your data in sync, rather than a small tax whenever you're querying and getting a result of your data to display. Okay? Everybody get this at this high level at the moment? If not, you can think of the times when it's explicitly called, like with outstring and outhost. What you're doing there is you're actually saying, I want to format this and output it, okay? So formatters can also be very logically organized, not just by type name, but also by control. We're going to keep touching on that later. And you can also have many views for one object. And we didn't really touch on this weakness of other formatting in other languages, but it's often very hard to have multiple views of a given type. You often have to do a lot of exotic trickery to make that happen. And PowerShell, it's also built in. So what's the catch, right? This all sounds great, fantastic, wonderful. Unfortunately, the way that you write it is as old as PowerShell, and it is written in pure XML. So yeah, that's a bit of a pain. But with that pain, the asterisk caveat, formatters are really great. And I'm not going to spend the whole talk, I promise, discussing every little XML attribute because, quite frankly, it's not worth any of our time. We are not here to learn how to write XML, after all. So what will we do today? Well, one, we're going to learn the basics of the formatting engine, what it is, how it works, what it does for you, and the basic controls you have available for you. Then we're going to write some basic formatters with Easy Out. I'll touch again on what Easy Out is, but it's a module that will help you do this. Then we're going to learn some of the more advanced things you can do with formatters. And again, we'll write some really cool formatters, this time with Easy Out again. Okay? So moving on, who knows what a format file is? Nobody has to. This is the beast in which they're actually implemented. They are a format PS1 XML file, and they should be loaded with a given module. You put a formats to process in your manifest, and it will load the format XML file. They can be loaded with update format data, but you really should not do this as it will cause bugs when trying to reload. Okay? Now, prior to PowerShell 7, core formatters could be found in home, and I think now is probably the first good time to take you over to a editor and show you a little bit of joy. So if you go, and here I'm in PowerShell 5 and change, if you look at PS Home, there are a number of format PS1 XML files in. When I actually started learning formatting, I had to learn them directly from the files. They didn't have a schema at that point. So these are fantastic references for you to use if you want. Unfortunately, in core and later, they're boiled directly into the product. And so there's no longer the reference file you can go look at. Now, for the technically inclined, they have since come out with a schema. You can go ahead and find it on GitHub, PowerShell, PowerShell blob, master source, schemas, format XSD. Okay? Again, I'm not trying to talk your ear off about XML, I promise. I will highlight one thing, though, that will keep coming back in this particular presentation. Most of the time, this whole verb-noun pairing in my slides is just kitsch. This slide deck has an unusually large number of real command names up there. So get format file, that's a command that is built into Easy Out that will give you format files. All right. And another command that really exists that you're using all the time without thinking about it is out default. So in PowerShell, formatting can be used explicitly, but it's very often used implicitly. For instance, get process hides a lot of properties and renames a few. Now, brief aside, hiding properties of objects is a great use for formatters. In fact, one of the simplest, best ways to use a formatter is to hide secure information from an output. Like, I don't remember exactly when, whether it was V6 or V7, but now if you echo a network credential, it won't show people your password. That's because the formatter hides it. The more debatable use is renaming properties, because users do tend to expect to be able to take the property name in the top of a formatter, or at least in a table formatter, and dot into that property. But getting back to it, when I say get process, PowerShell will format it for you, whether or not I've actually said anything to out host or out string. And the reason this works is because every result in PowerShell that isn't assigned is sent to out default. This is the little part of secret sauce of how PowerShell works. It's true in all hosts. It is the last step of the pipeline that you never see. Okay? Anybody got a high level question on this? Because it is a little wonky. Moving
No
on
questions
then.
yet? Nothing in the chat. Go ahead.
So this particular thing means that if you're in a formatter, you're almost always at the end of the pipeline. This is really, really powerful and really cool, because a lot of the general rules about what you can or can't do in PowerShell aren't as valid if you're not ever going to be assigned or piped beyond that. For instance, you can't write host in most PowerShell contexts. Now, if you write host in a formatter, you won't be able to outstring as nicely, but you can do it. And you can do it without causing trouble for the rest of your ecosystem, because you know that that value won't be assigned. Okay? Now, a formatter is found by using the PS type names list. I'm going to go back to the ISE here for a second and quickly show that. So let's go ahead and get processed.
Hey, James.
Yes, sir.
Question. Michael Mendoza asks, out default versus out host. I'm guessing he's asking what's the difference?
Out host is explicitly going to the host now, right now. Out default is going out to the default, which tends to be the host, but theoretically doesn't need to be. This is one of those unfulfilled promise of PowerShell things. The PowerShell engine just produces objects, right? So theoretically, you could have an out default, and I do have a couple of them, that intercept what object is going to be outputted and then send it to, say, WPF or something else to render. So yeah, sorry, it's a little bit of a subtle distinction. In most cases, they're effectively the same. Out default will put it out to the host, but on a pure engine level, they're different in explicitness. Does that answer mostly make sense?
Sounds good.
All right. So back to the type names thing for a second. If I get process and type it to get member, sorry for use of aliases. What I have here is a system diagnostics process, okay? And if I get format data, this hopefully will be nice to me. Yeah, this will give me the definition that PowerShell has for that particular process. It actually has one of theirs and one of mine. We'll get back to that. This actually says then, from the type name that it has, I'm going to go use that formatter for the result. The other way you can get to the type name is on each individual object, you'll have a PS type names property. And as you can see, it's a hierarchical list. So the one we're matching is here. It'll match the first one in a top-down fashion, right? But if we happen to not find a match for this and say have a match for this, it would format. So PS type names will naturally default to the .NET class list. This is easy, good to understand. But it can be anything, including type names that could never exist. Let me very quickly demonstrate that just in a pure bit of PowerShell. So I'm going to create a custom object. I'm going to give it a type name of HTTPS schema org thing. And I'm going to say name equals thing, URL equals. Now I might end up being bit by this because I actually do happen to have a formatter for thing probably on this system. Not at the moment then. So I have my two properties. I go get member. Its type name is schema.org thing. Never could be a real .NET type name, but I can build a formatter around it in PowerShell. So is everybody's brain starting to crack open a little bit at that one?
Looking good.
The other obvious thing to point out is we didn't need a real class or real object. We just could give it a property bag and say, make it look like this. And in fact, to give a real practical example of this, let me start process PowerShell. 1 second. So if I go look at get process, oh, sorry, I'd moved that onto a different screen. Get process, include username, and I pipe that to get member. Sorry, it keeps moving that window when I try to resize it. There we go. So you can see they actually have a diagnostics process, but they've added a little bit of extra information to their type name to include the username. And lo and behold, they actually have a slightly different formatter that includes the username instead of the existing column set. So this is actually a somewhat commonly used trick within PowerShell itself in terms of how you allow for different views of a particular object coming back from a command. And that's one really practical example of where it's used. Now, this is if you have a formatter. If you don't have a formatter, the formatting engine still does work for you. You probably are kind of vaguely familiar with what it does, but to restate it for the ones that aren't, if you have an object that has less than 4 properties, it will format as a table. If it has more than 4 more properties, it will format as a list. Everybody's experienced that, right? I'm going to hope that's a yes.
I hope they have.
Now, if you've got just 3 properties coming back, by all means, save yourself the pain, create an ordered hash table, use this. You don't need to write a formatter for tiny little things, but it's really, really good to have in your toolkit. So questions so far on what out default's doing?
No questions that I see.
Sweet. Okay, now we get to the kind of silly questions area of the presentation. Well, what exactly can I format? Well, there are 4 types of formatters: table, list, custom, and wide. Each has an associated command, which I'll run through with you now. Now, because I'm not going to be doing any fancy formatting in those themselves, and because I've gotten general feedback about wanting to make my slides a little bit more photogenic, well, you know, let's see how we can use these 4 format commands in the terminal and, you know, go from there. One quick aside before we continue going on, though: do not use them in functions unless you're piping to outstring, unless you really know what you're doing. These are great commands to kind of understand what you can do with the formatter, but they're not great commands to include in your functions because they mangle your object's return. So do not return format X, Y, or Z from your function. But with that in mind, let's take a look at each. First, format table. Anybody got 3 guesses on what format table does? Formats things as tables. It's mostly obvious to people, right? This is the correct reaction to, it's a very obvious commandlet name, right? Of course, we can also use format table to see a different view of things. And this is nice. This is actually consistent throughout all the formatting commands. You can actually point them at a different high-level view and see a different view of an object. So now, since it's a little underused, and I like, you know, knocking socks off a bit, let's look at an example included in Easy Out. So I'm going to go open up terminal, bring that over in here. Now that expanded correctly. So I'm going to import module Easy Out. and I'm going to get process select, format table view system, or process heat map, I believe. I could flip back and see, but there we are. Now I am doing a bit of teasing. Obviously, we can do a lot more than just format a drab old table, as this demonstration makes clear. But the point here is that you could have as many different views around a table as you'd like. You can have a given object, you can have a X number of different styles around that object, and you can make that render with a couple of different tricks, either by altering its type name or by using one of the format commands and explicitly picking the view. Okay?
And so with that one, you're actually checking the PM and the WS size, for example, and then colorizing appropriately.
Yes. Well, I told you I like,
Yep.
blowing socks off and showing coolness, but that is mainly teasing. I'll come back to how that works later. I promise. Now, in case you're curious about the XML underneath, in a format PS1 XML, tables are represented in table control. Yadoy. They can align any column, format the text in any column, and by that I mean use a standard .NET string format for any given column. So format as currency, format as localized time, so on and so forth. You can also change the header of the column. This is how you can make column headers that don't exist, like GPS parentheses S. You can also provide a script block instead of the direct contents. So instead of saying this points directly to that property that is real, you can create a virtual property that actually returns different results. Right? And this can be handy in a number of ways aesthetically. One of the simplest ones is creating formatters that will enumerate a list and then wrap. By being able to wrap and enumerate list, you can actually create quite a good user experience around not that deep hierarchical data. And I did already touch on it, but you can wrap or auto size a given table, but you cannot do both. You can also provide explicit column widths, but I wouldn't recommend doing tons of that if you don't really know exactly what's coming back and how large you'd like it to be. I'd recommend using auto size or wrap. Okay, so that's format table. What about format list? Now that's at least somewhat useful. It just gives you a list of properties. And that's it. I mean, it really not that cool. Like format table, we can format list with a view. And that's all you need to understand about it. The XML, sorry, I got a little typo here. Lists are represented in a list control. And a list can format the text in any given row, provide a script block to display instead, and optionally hide a row. But it does leave a blank space that will make you wonder. So they're somewhat useful. Questions on format list?
None so far.
All right. Well, then we get to my least favorite. I actually thought I would really use this. There's a wide control, and I'll show you what this looks like on the file system closer to the end of the talk. But this would theoretically distribute text. Theoretically. It doesn't really work as expected. It should just take a list of strings and distribute them, in nice automatic columns. And it should be able to take, a number of easy objects and kind of render it. But in practice, well, how do I put it? This is what happens to their slam dunk. Format wide is almost entirely useless. I'm covering it for completion. It's good for you to know, but yeah, save yourself the trouble. So it has a few issues. If you need to know it, they're represented in a format PS1 XML in a wide control, but wide controls cannot render a list of things in nifty columns. You have to actually have a list of properties separated amongst a number of objects for it to do that. All right. It also can't be smart about the number of columns to display. You can have a formatter that is auto-sized, sure, but you can't give it a min or a max column or prevent it from making columns too little. It's just not smart enough to auto-size. But most frustratingly, it truncates text. So if you have a format wide that has too much stuff in it, it'll just chop text off. And if you have a item in a format wide that has more than one line in it or starts with a blank line, then it will just be invisible. So with that pain shared, please save yourself the trouble. Never even try to use them, like ever. All right, now we get to my personal favorite, format custom. As is somewhat implied by the name, format custom can do anything. I do mean anything. Beyond that, you can also have those multiple different views. So in keeping with the Brooklyn Nine-Nine theme, yeah, I'm quite happy with what I can do with format custom. As we get further and further into it, you'll see that this opens up quite a number of possibilities. But still need to understand the XML, at least at its basic level. In format PS1 XML's custom views are stored in a custom control. They can branch based off of a condition, render text or new lines, display properties with their own formatting, conditionally display content, and enumerate properties or arbitrary scripts. Oh, and also call other formatting controls. So they're handy. They're pretty handy. They're by far the most powerful of the formatting options. And on that, I'll take you back to the ISE to see the other formatter that you see every day without thinking about it. If I get help, I'm actually looking at a PowerShell formatter here. If I get member this, see, we've got the mammal command info, core, yada, yada, yada. And if I go look at PS home, I have the help format file right here. And if I look at how much of it is just custom controls and simple views, well, it's pretty obvious. So you got our quick little table view there. You got our help topic view. Where's the one that we actually were using? Let's see. Let's try the P3 or the V3 one. I suppose one other thing to briefly point out here while I go looking for implementation details that are fairly unimportant is that you can actually have localized text in one of these as well. The point of it is not to find the actual source of that. That'll drive you mad. The point of it is to show that I can actually get help, say parameter, star, pipe that to get member, and get back an entirely, get help, parameter star. Sorry, 1 second. Gotta love how long the ISE sometimes takes to stop, right? So if I pipe that to get member, I have another formatter that is called in for each of the different parameters. So every little chunk of the get help output is really just very complicated format nesting. And while it will drive you absolutely insane to reverse engineer it, it is kind of inspiring, you know, in kind of a in the mouth of madness sort of way. So now we know the 4 elements of PSM1 XML or PS1 XML. You have a custom control, a table control, a list control, and a Y control. Now, I swear we're almost done talking about XML, but just to kind of round off your basic understanding, each of these controls lives in a view element. View elements live inside a view definitions element, and a view definitions element is the child of the root element configuration. Okay? Now you can also have custom controls that have or that live inside of a control element. And the control element can live inside of the controls element, which also lives at root. And this is how you'd register complicated controls. But yeah, formatting XML is, to call it ugly would be very kind. So as fascinating as this is, just asking in the room, do you want to write things in direct XML? Do you want to write advanced formatters this way, or is this a little closer to your reaction? I did not. I very much did not want to write.
Who the hell knows?
Yeah. So to save my sanity, I went and built Easy Out. Now to save your sanity, you can just install the thing. So yeah, long ago, as I first discovered these format PS1 XML files and was asked by other teams to help them figure out how they could adopt PowerShell, the need for a module became really clear. I could ask people to learn this thing that was very left field but PowerShell related, or I could ask them to learn PowerShell. All right? So prior to modules even being called modules, there was an internal copy of this module you're about to see today with slightly different spelling. So this makes it actually the oldest package / module in continued existence. Enjoy. It's called Easy Out now. And why don't we get to it? Why don't we get it installed and get up and running? You can install it yourself on your own box with install module easy out -scope current user, or you can get it on GitHub. If anybody's going to go do that, I'll give them a couple seconds to do so before I keep moving on. All right. Now, to be clear, not a real commandlet name is a real commandlet name. Save sanity, sorry, I don't have that commandlet for you. Install module, that you have on the box. Once you've got Easy Out installed, you're going to primarily use a command called write format view to write your formatters. But before we get into how you're going to use it, let's understand some top level things about Easy Out and what it is. It is a development tool. What does that mean? It means we use Easy Out to build our format PS1 XML. But your module does not require Easy Out. Your module ships your formatter. It does not ship Easy Out. It does not need Easy Out. It uses it and it's done with it. Easy Out could die and go away and you could still have your formatter working just fine until the end of time. Okay? You can use Easy Out 2 different ways. The way we're first going to demonstrate is using it interactively to try things out. And we do this with the simple pipeline, write format view, whatever our view is going to be, pipe to out format data, pipe to add format data. Does that mostly make sense as a pipeline to everybody? I'm going to take that as somewhat for some people.
Let's see it in play.
Okay, indeed. Let's write some formatters. Now, took some picking to figure out what I was going to actually use as the demo this time. I wanted to find a formatter that could be useful on Core and on Linux as well. And well, it's kind of hard to find good command overlaps between all of them. But I did. So let's go to my home directory for a second and get to this presentation. Our formatter we're going to pick on is get time zone. Okay. Now, it's a little ugly to start off with, right? It doesn't seem like it's that problematic until you do this. Okay, that's actually getting slow just to display me the information. To show you the difference, all TZs. That's pretty quick. Most of the time that I was waiting for it to render. And this is an interesting aspect of PowerShell performance to be aware of. It's one of the other great reasons to write formatting, because with the lack of formatter on get time zone, rendering all the properties makes it slower, and showing all of the properties makes it almost completely useless. So you see why this is not exactly the most helpful experience. You also see where we got just a little bit of dumb luck because, well, we're only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 properties. So if they were just nice enough as an object to have fewer of them, then at least we would see this as a table by default. But no, there's no formatter. And now something that would be a naturally nice and useful part of the system is instead ugly and kind of useless. So how do we fix this? Well, let's start really simple. Now, write format view can write you a table view, a list view, or a custom view. You can also provide it format XML if you wanted to write a wide control. As I said, they're mostly useless. What we're going to do here is extraordinarily simple, at least to start off with. Baby steps. We're going to write a type or format view using the type name system time zone information. And that's going to just use the display name property. And then we're going to use out format data and add format data. And then I'm going to get the available time zones. Isn't that much cleaner? Didn't it render much more quickly? Wasn't that a little line that's worth it? And you're more than welcome to use easy out in your profile just to tweak how things display for you. I mean, it's a valid use case around it. So if you wanted to include something like this in your profile, I would be a fan. But I don't think it's anywhere near as good as we want yet because, well, it's not quite right. It's especially easy to demonstrate at this particular time of the year, but my UTC offset is incorrect. Beyond that, I don't really want these in one column. I want two. So let's just move a little bit further down the line here. And let's check our second variation of this. So in this, I'm going to keep using a built-in column here, which is base UTC offset. And I'm going to register it and run it. Oh, that kind of looks a little bit better, at least to my opinion. It is very much a matter of opinion here. But you know what I don't like is this extra large gap here that is a side effect of us having base UTC offset. I want it to kind of hug right up to that ID. So the next thing I'm going to do is start to use a few more parameters of write format view. I'm just going to try the simplest one first. I'm going to auto size it. Okay, that does not look much better. Why not? Well, because I still have all that space for base UTC offset. Okay, so try 4. Now I'm going to create a virtual property. I'm just going to call it UTC offset. Now, how we call that in Easy Out is a little bit can be a little bit wonky for you. You give it a list of properties that you're going to display, and then your virtual property is the display name property, or your alias property in this case, the display name property and the real property. So we're saying instead of the column being called base UTC offset, just call it UTC offset. Isn't that cleaner too? I know you can't nod in a, you know, digital presentation, but any degrees of yays or nays would be great. Are we improving or not?
Looks good to me, but I'm biased. We got some improves and yeses.
Sweet. And biased how? You're like the world's worst teacher's pet. Kidding. Now, the other problem I already pointed out, the one we actually really want to get to, is it's still lying to me right now, at least. If I get time zone, I'm not in Pacific Standard Time right this second, am I? Like, it's daylight savings time right now. And I would like to display that in a way that makes sense to the user. So I'm going to give it a name, and I'm going to give it a delta UTC. Now, this is a cool other thing to note. You can have stuff like emoji in property names. It won't hate you. The thing that will potentially hate you is whether or not the console can render it. In code, an ISC emoji will generally render. In the PowerShell XE console and PowerShell Core less so, and in terminal almost definitely. Other characters are hit and miss. This particular one, if you'd like to copy and paste it from the demo later, is fine in all consoles. So we're going to go create a name virtual property. And in that, what we're going to do is figure out, does the time zone support daylight savings time? Is it daylight savings time now? Okay. Give me the daylight name. Otherwise, give me the standard name. If it doesn't support daylight savings time, give me the standard name. And for delta USC or UTC, I'm going to go get a virtual property containing the UTC offset, figuring it out based off of a method that they provide on the object. Okay. For one extra bell and whistle, I'm going to change my column alignment so that I align the name to the right. And are we getting cleaner and cleaner? In fact, I think this is almost as good as I want to get. But I'm going to note another pain here. So I just added a name header, and I give me a PowerShell user, and I go do tz.name, and it's not there. That's going to drive me nuts. Now, if you do end up creating properties to assist in display, the polite thing to do is to take things one more step further and actually start to develop types files attached to it. Sorry, I guess I have one duplicated demo. Here's your one with the types file. So Easy Out can write both types PS1 XMLs, which are not the focus of this talk, and format PS1 XMLs. The commands are very similar for each. Write type view here is going to take the system time zone information, give me a script property for name, and for UTC offset and for local time. The only big difference to be aware of is it's $this, not $underbar in a types versus a formatter. Okay. So what I'm doing here is I'm declaring a new time zone information. I'm dynamically disambiguating which module I'm adding these into so that they don't clobber each other just by giving them a name. You wouldn't have to do this if you're building a module around it, but if you're trying to load up multiple things to work together interactively, this will help you. So we're giving it these three script properties. And in our formatter, which has gotten a lot shorter again, we go give it one property, give it another property, give it another property. The delta UTC is now an alias to UTC offset. And whereas before we were returning the local time as a string, Actually, that might have been the difference. Yeah, I'd added a short time string there and a local time property. Before we were returning that as a string, now local time is a time, and we're formatting it as a string, as a short time string. So this is our last try of this one.
Hey, James, before you go, so question is why dollar? Maybe go a little bit more on why dollar this versus dollar underscore?
I have no say in that. That is what is required by the types or formatters respectively. In a type, it makes logical sense. You're manipulating a current object, okay? So in a type, there is a this. Well, you can kind of think of a formatters as like a for each, and that's why in formatters it's dollar underbar instead.
Okay, yep.
So I would suggest that if you're writing either, you do something like this, basically right at the top of your virtual properties and custom formatters, where you assign dollar underbar or this really quickly so that it doesn't end up getting clobbered by anything else and so that your code is more clear. You know.
Yep, makes sense.
Yes, you have the potential for copy and paste bugs here. In fact, I made one myself. I forgot to rename local time. And in fact, actually, let me demonstrate the bug by reverting it. So I've now given local time dollar underbar instead. Okay, well, the demo gods are actually kinder to me than expected, but yeah, normally this isn't as reliably populated. This will be, though. Again, this is in the right type view versus the right format view. And to round off the bend, once we've got them all registered, now we have a very nice table view around those types, or that type. And we also can, if I get member, this time zone. Well, sorry, it's a very glary time in my day. It's still a time zone info, but I now have these 3 new script properties. And I can say $tz.name. And it's right. I am in daylight time. Okay. So that's most of what we're going to show, at least in this round of time zone optimization. We'll get back to it in a half second. But I do believe this is a fair time to pause for questions. I'm going to leave this one up. Who has more curiosities about what's going on here?
You got any questions, you can raise your hand and I can unmute you, you can ask, or you can drop it into the group chat if you'd like.
All
No
right.
questions at the moment.
Going once, going twice, going on. At least if I get to the right one. There we go. So we fixed a bit of the ugly.
Wait, I think we might have a question.
Oh, okay.
Hi, sorry about that. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
I don't know if you've covered this, maybe I missed it, but why the $sign this versus the $sign underscore?
Because type files require this and format files require underscore. In the same sort of way that if you add a script property in normal PowerShell, it will be this dot property to access other things within that property. Right? If I say add member script property, this is the variable for what my current object is. Okay?
Gotcha.
And if I do a for each object, right? Dollar underbar is my default current variable of the current item. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's what I'm more familiar with the $sign underscore
Yeah.
in my scripts.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So They both effectively can mean the current object. There is one case where they mean different things, and that's event receivers, but that's not something we're talking about today. Okay. Any more questions?
Anybody else? I saw a couple of people on mute. Geraldo, do you want to have a question? No? I think we're good to go.
All right, well then back to a PowerPoint. Now that we've fixed some degree of ugly, let's learn how we'd actually write it end to end. Or once we know how to write them, let's figure out how we integrate them. There's a really handy little function in EasyOut called write easy format file. Again, real commandlet name and real commandlet name. What write easy format file does is it will generate a build script for you, and that will allow you to define formatting in a couple of different places: the individual file, or /formatting, or /views underneath that module. And types can be defined in that file or /types. This makes sense?
Yep, it does.
Okay. Sorry, you're gonna have to give me a second. Very glary. Okay, so getting back to demo land for a second. Let's take a look at the full form of this, but before I get to it, I'm going to go re-import EasyOut to clear out the temporary formatters that I generated. So I had actually already run the easy format file function and generated this all once, but here we go. This was just created with write easy format file, pipe to set content, time zone info EasyOut. By default, it will derive the module name you're working on from the file name. So if your file is timezoneinfo.easyout or .easyformat, your module will be assumed to be timezoneinfo. You can pass these parameters to write easy format if you'd like. You can tweak the script if you'd like. This is just there to help you, okay? And again, I can write formatters here, but in both of these cases, I'm writing them in line. I'm also writing my types in line, so let's go look at that first. Types is kind of cool. So you can actually have a full .NET hierarchy or .NET-like hierarchy of files underneath if you want. You can also, again, define them in line, but here I have a get local time property, get name property, all the code that we just had in those separate file or in one file moved into quick little separate ones. And actually this is used very extensively by a module I build called Power Arcade, which I might have some time to show towards the end. But this gives us the ability to actually take our code and abstract it. Now, that's types. Let's look at formatting. Now, there's two ways you can write these files. You can provide a PS type name or script or output type attribute at the top of it, and it will assume it to be a custom action. But you can also use them to provide multiple formatters for a single type within a given file. So now we're going to have 4 different formatters around our time zone information. Okay. Our almost entirely useless wide is the third one. Sorry, let me, again, glary day, got to find my mouse. There it is. All right. Our table is up here. Our list is really simple. I'm just displaying 3 properties. For our wide, I'm just displaying 1, our name. And then I'll get back to what we do here in a second, but that's our fancy custom formatter. Okay. So let's go ahead and take this. And I'll rerun this easy out file. Actually, by way of demonstration, let me delete a couple files first. So let's go ahead and delete that format file, delete this format file or types file, rerun that. Look at that, both my files are back. And I can go to look at our time zone info format PS1 XML, and look, it's so much uglier XML than we had to actually write by hand. Same thing for our types. So you don't have to worry about what that XML is at all. This is nice. Now that we've re-registered that, let me go import this module. One other thing to really quickly note here is that this module doesn't actually do anything. And by that, I mean, if I can type psedit correctly, we have a module version and we have a format and types to process, but we don't even have a root module. It is an entirely valid PowerShell command or scenario to write modules that have no actual content. One of the scenarios you can use it for is to customize your views. So you could write a very, very complicated set of customizations for how you want to see data within your organization. Have a little module that you load in people's profiles, and bada bing, bada boom, you have a ticketing system in your console. That doesn't suck. So I'm going to go import this module. All right. And I'm going to say get time zone. And as you can see, it's the same format we were used to there. But now I can also say format list. And instead of seeing all the properties, I just see the 3 that I told it to. This is one of the rare cases where format Y doesn't entirely suck, sort of. It just doesn't really, look that cool, but okay. So there's what a wide formatter looks like if you actually have one property and one property only that would tell you what you need. And yeah, okay, in that case, it's not completely messing up, it's slam dunk. But if one of these was a few characters longer, it would be.
Here we got a question.
Is there a question?
Yeah, question is, did you say you could use the output type attribute on a function as a way of forcing it to use a formatter?
No. I said, and I will show you an example later, I said you can define a format file that does this. So there are a couple of them in Easy Out. If I look at my formatting directory here, I have a time zone info.format.ps1. I can have that for any arbitrary types that I would like. I can have that. I can do any number of things that I'd like within this file. At the point that I start to use any of the built-in commands to Easy Out, I no longer interpret this file as an action you'd like to run. So to jump over to see how this works in Easy Out, let's look at Rich Module Info, I believe has it. Yeah. So one of the example formatters that ships with Easy Out is if I say get module Easy Out, pipe to format custom, I'll actually get a nice little table of verb noun pairs and a nice little breakdown from my README. And yeah. This does the mapping because in this file, all of this is assumed to be what would be within write format view action. And it's making the bind based off of these two. If you have one and only one thing that you're going to do with it, and it's going to be a custom action, this is fine. Otherwise, I'd recommend you just split them off into files that write format view directly. Does that make sense? Yes, no, maybe so.
They think so.
All right. You'll have to forgive the increase in background noise. It is sweltering here. Okay. Resuming course. Let's see, we were showing our time zone formatter in a module and one formatter for each type. I was going to show off this last one here. So we have our format custom for time zone. So let's get time zone all or list available and pipe that to format custom. This has now become my favorite because I'm actually able to get rid of a lot of the surrounding spacing. Although I don't particularly love the unevenness of this. But the point you should be able to see here is essentially you can do almost anything you'd like directly in the action of a custom. And one other thing I'm going to point out, just in terms of weirdness, each individual action can return one and only one string. So a pretty common way that I'll write these things is to wrap them in something like this. So I'm basically taking 3 different parts of the string, joining it by spaces. Make sense to everybody?
Make an array and then join it.
So the last thing I'll point out here is that I can actually control the default order by the order within the file. Now, this is true within the PS1 XML file, and it is true as a side effect of the way these things are written. So just by having all of these in one file, this will register first, this will register second, this will register third, that'll register fourth, okay? So I've moved them around. Before I moved them around, or sorry, I have moved them around before I re-import. Get time zone returns me in a table, okay? So I'm gonna go redo my time zone info easy out, re-import my module, and there you go. Look at the time. I was worried this would be a shorter talk. I'm kidding. This is we're not anywhere near the end yet.
Well, that's you got about 15 minutes.
Oh, come on! I thought you said go as long as you want.
8 o'clock. This is
Thought
long
we
as
had a
you can.
captive audience. All right. Well then, I guess we better get moving to the really cool stuff. Let's do some advanced formatting because we are still at the tip of that iceberg, and we do have to cover a few nifty capabilities first. But once we get there, you'll be able to see the world open wide. First, controls, expressions, and groups. Then we can get to the new coolness. Now again, real commandlet name, write format control. A format PS1 XML can contain a control which contains custom views. You can declare a control anywhere and use it anywhere within your formatter. You can use it inside of other custom views. And you can use it as the header for a views group. So I'm gonna just bring up a quick example of using these things together. Okay, so here I'm declaring a control called myHeader, which just has a bunch of text in it, and another control called star. All right, then I'm creating a format view that groups by myHeader, and this is a little bit of a trick. So by giving it a group script and always giving it a value of 1, I'm forcing everything into one group. You could also group by property. That would be the way that, say, recurse works. In that you see the group. Now that you know what you're looking for, you see what this is, right? Group. Group label. Group property. Well, in this case, I'm giving a group action instead of a label, which is going to be fixed text. And I'm grouping on a fixed item, which means I'm only going to have one group. And I'm just creating an array of asterisks from 1 to whatever the n passed in was. and I'm rendering them through the control star, and then I'm enumerating them, which means I'll call the control once for each item. Okay? So what we'll see here is pretty silly and simple. Run this. There's my header. And there is my slowly growing batches of stars. It should be kind of obvious to anybody at this point that something like a horizontal bar graph would be very easy. You can do quite a lot with controls. But since apparently we don't have tons of time, let's move on from that. Saw them working together. Let's receive our epiphanies. Before we keep going on to the new coolness, let's make sure that a few light bulbs have gone off in our heads. First, formatting can be very flexible. Should have seen that just in the microcosm on the time zone information. But does everybody see that now? Hopefully, maybe. All right. Number 2 is the types don't have to be real .NET types.
Absolutely, people say.
All right. So you can create a formatter that is arbitrarily applied to any object or property bag you'd like. You can call it basically anything you'd like. To be fair, I haven't tried calling any of them with a caret in their name, but you know, I'm not pushing my luck. We can also stack our formatting. We can build one formatter on top of another. This hasn't necessarily been clear to you yet, but you can, within a formatter, either call another control from another formatter or pipe another item to outstring and get it back formatted. So you can actually build formatters that display a number of different types of objects, basically by artifice. Now, even though I've known this more formatting for a while, I've had a few of these epiphanies for a bit. It's really taken quite a bit for the last one to sink in. For many, 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 many years, I wanted to do interesting things with the formatting engine, but found myself limited by the formatting engine itself. And once I figured out that I can stack them and that I can render anything, I realized how silly that was. We're not really limited to table, list, wide, and custom. We're limited by our imagination. Even if our custom formatter is intercepting the object to send it off to a flat screen TV and do nothing, right? We can do literally anything in a formatter. We can build as many abstractions upon this as we'd like. So, once we can build these abstractions, the world becomes our oyster. Let's open that oyster up. In 2020, I started doing this. See, again, I've been playing with formatters for years, but kind of have had my hand accidentally tied behind my own back, not realizing that I could actually do more. And to that degree, I've now decided to make Easy Out start extending what formatters can do, not just giving you a basic way to write any given formatter. A few very nice pearls have popped out of this oyster so far. First one, brand new type of formatter, tree views. Who wouldn't mind a tree view in PowerShell? So you can have them for close to free now. Another one, full colorization. And this is getting better and better every time. Support for bold, underline, and invert. And another crazy one is multi-mode formatting. I'm still very much exploring what's possible, so suggestions and challenges are very welcome here. Okay? So without that much further ado, let's talk about how Write Format Tree View works and show some examples. And create a tree view outside of a control and custom views. A few examples will ship with Easy Out. The one
James,
that's most...
just wanted to let you know, a lot of good positive feedback in the chat room. Go ahead.
Go ahead. All right, good. Thanks. the file tree formatter. That's been something people have wanted for a while. Now, in interest of saving time and extra zazzy factor, there's my nice GIF of a file tree formatter. This is also on the Easy Out GitHub page, but I will pull up in a console and show you that in a second. In fact, actually, I'll tilt a card and then show that. The other good one to know that it is actually a tree formatter, but might not look like it, or at least, you know, to amateur eyes, is an XML element formatter, colorized XML. These are both actually written with tree formatters. So let's go first, look at how this works. So I'm going to go My Modules, Easy Out, Formatting, File Tree View. This is actually a pretty simple one. So the selection set file system types, this is a good little thing to understand about the way formatters work. You can say 3 or 4 different types are grouped in a selection set and then refer to that throughout. File system type's the one that will naturally bind it's the one that naturally drives the formatting for like get child item. This part's a little bit wonky, but fairly easy to explain. These are a few ASCII characters that make for a good looking list. I'm going to show the property name for each file. If it has children, I will know because I can or can't enumerate files. If enumerate files didn't exist, no. If I couldn't enumerate files, then it won't return anything. If I could enumerate files, it will return the file. And same thing is true for enumerating directories. So it'll render directories or files, then directories. Actually, yeah, files, then directories. So that in mind, let's go ahead and get child item recurs. Okay, pipe to format custom, because that's what it is. And voila. Now for the next step of coolness, we actually got to go into a bit of a, I'm going to even say, better for colorization experience here. So I'm going to go re-import Easy Out, and just to kind of round off the bend, I'm going to say XML attribute equals value and close off the tag. And there we go, colorized XML. Give it a couple of children. Let's do that real quick.
Just what XML was missing for all these years.
I mean, it does also prettify it. So node text. That'll also, hierarchically organize your nodes. So one other thing to point out.
James, we got about 5 minutes, so you want to?
Oh, come on, man! You got to rush this. Okay. One other thing to point out.
Good closer. Do a good closer, and then we're out.
I'm getting towards it. Give me a sec. I'm rushing. One other thing to point out is that these gracefully degrade. So if I wanted to go ahead and show XML here, I get part of the formatter, but I don't get the colorization because this host does not support it. But it doesn't sit there yelling at me that it didn't have colorization capabilities. It just shows it in black and white. All right. So back to the slideshow real quick. You got those 2 bits of joy. The other area of colorization that's pretty awesome is you can write format view, color row, and color property. These will apply conditional formatting, again, if supported by the host. And in this one, I am nice enough to give you a nice example you can use in Easy Out itself. So I'm going to go take my example from write format view real quick. run it in terminal. Come on, terminal. There we go. So there's my even odd colorized row.
Zebra striping.
Zebra striping indeed. If you wanted to build a zebra stripe formatter, you can now. And if you wanted to get even more nitty gritty, you can use write format view expression, which is what's used to write advanced formatting inside of a custom action. And you can use that within a control. Write format view expression has foreground color and background color, also has bold and invert now. And colors can be a hex value, the name of a setting in private data colors, I'll show you that one in a second, or a well-known console color or a well-known stream. Okay, so let's make sure that we're at the right one. Using that, we can create some vibrant multicolor formatting. And to show off, let's take a look at two other formatters. We already looked briefly at our colorized XML, which will use the color settings. And then we're going to look at a formatter for reflection. These are all built into Easy Out as demos and funsies. Okay, so for our colorized XML formatter, what we have for most of it, XML element, yeah, there it is. We have a tree view where instead of directly rendering text, our properties are a series of expressions. Our foreground color, Easy Out, XML tag, that's name of module, section of settings, subsection of settings. So if I go look at Easy Out PSD1, that's how it's deciding which colors it should use. Okay. Now, the other case, which we'll look at very briefly, is the types. So let's go ahead and look at the system type format. This one's a little bigger, just a tad. This creates a nice reflection view. It actually has two formatters here, one that'll show you the full formatter and its group, and the other one that will go ahead and just show you all the details on the type. So let's see that in action. And let's go back to our terminal here. All right. So I'm going to switch over to my other PowerShell here. I'm going to import module, home, documents, Windows PowerShell. This is core. And Easy Out is tested cross-platform and continuously integrated, so you should hopefully be able to trust that it will work for you. But let's go ahead and see some cool. So if I go ahead and say int here, that's nice, you're all used to this. Now I can say int pipe to format custom. Okay, that's nice enough. What happens when I follow its instructions at the top and I say system type full? All right. So I don't need to have another window open with Visual Studio just to look at like object metadata anymore, do I? And not a bad formatter, if I would say so myself. But because this is actually using all these standard streams, in this case, this is using the stream for progress and for warning, okay? Showing off another bit of unpublished for the moment, I'm going to go import this module that will allow me to change my terminal profile. Sorry, this isn't public yet.
All right, James, this is going to be the last one because I need to bounce.
Oh, it's okay. I got this is a good one. So I'm going to set the profile here. Profile name would be, I believe, just PowerShell. Yeah. And input object color scheme is, Actually, that shouldn't matter, but still. Jackie Brown. Yes, do it. All right, there it's changed over my color. But lo and behold, that still works. It still formats correctly. So I think that was enough showing off.
All right. Sorry about that.
That's okay. I got a little bit more there, and then talking about implicit formatting as HTML, which I guess you can just see the reaction GIF for. And yeah,
all right.
this is
So,
getting cooler and cooler every day. Ask me if you got feature requests. Graphing is coming. More format commands are coming.
Are you going to be able? You'll share the links with me to the presentation and to the GitHub and to
I will share the links to the presentation. I will probably be uploading the presentation on GitHub. You can hit me up on Twitter. You can email me. You can also go ahead and visit the project Easy Out on Gallery or on GitHub itself.
Great.
And
Hey,
additional.
You
Go ahead. No, it's all right.
I wanted to thank you for doing this tonight. Appreciate it. Doing all the work to get this set up. Everybody, thanks for showing up, and make sure you watch the meetup.com. We've got a couple of more presentations coming. We're working on more speakers. And if you want to speak, let me know. If you know somebody that you want them to speak, have them get in touch with me. And I guess we'll see everybody in in June. So stay safe and enjoy. Thanks, James.
Thanks, Doug.
All right.
Catch you later.
Later. Bye.
All right. Bye.